background sound is kind of interesting. You know. Also, welcome. I've been sitting there doing nothing for about a minute. I was just looking and checking some stuff, actually. So, yeah. Just looking at the auto captation that is trying to understand what I'm saying. And it is not accurate at all, but I will just keep it on. So we will continue our journey through the game with the developers saying stuff. We'll see what kind of stuff they will have to say whenever the game wants to load. And not like incredibly lag as it did. It's fine. So we've been here, we looked at the cats, all that kind of stuff. So let's go out. So we had everything, that's good. Let's go this way.
From a level design perspective, why was Tacoma, why was the actual station built with so many angles in the first place?
Basically to make an interesting shape and sightline. That was like my intention. When I was doing the original grade blocks, everything was pretty squished together because, you know, we were really emphasizing like keeping the station feeling compact and, you know, small enough to be realistic in space, you know?
Yeah. And then the wall models themselves are like, because they're angled on top of angles, so it means that the footprint of at the base, so the floor area is actually smaller than the ceiling at the top. So sometimes I would put the final meshes in and the top part of the wall would cut into like Clive's closet. And you know, in level design and environment art, there's this idea of the grid being God.
Yeah.
And that whole area, like, we just totally ignored the grid, and we just, everything is just sort of bespokely created.
Yeah. It's funny because like I think the area is still like, it's cool to walk through, and Ops is one of the wings that I think we pulled off the like feeling compact on a space station theme the best. Because it really does feel like you're kind of in this constrained space. I mean, the gym is pretty open, but like this hallway with Clive's bunk and office, it actually, I do feel like it feels small and realistic. So despite the challenges of actually building it, I still feel like it's successful.
Lessons were learned.
Yeah.
So you were looking at what is now the lobby of the Zenith Lunar Resort on the surface of the moon, but that is not what the area depicted was originally made for.
Yeah, this was originally the main lobby of the station where the visitors would come in and this would be the first thing they'd see.
In the original version of the game, Tacoma Station was a much more opulent. It was a customer-facing space, and you know, still in our fiction, the richest of the rich are the people who do things like come up to the lunar resort. But partway through development, we realized that these big, opulent public spaces are kind of the antithesis of what our games are about, which is kind of getting into these dense, intimate spaces that tell you a lot about the people who lived in them.
Right, certainly, like, you know, almost by definition, like, a big public space, no matter how fancy and detailed, cannot be personal.
Yeah, I mean, it can tell you about the state of the world broadly, it can tell you about the function of the place, but you would have to go into the offices of the people who run the place and look at their workspaces and see their personal effects to really understand who they were. And so a big part of revisiting the core, like, kind of conceit of the game was to say, how do we make the station as a whole something that can tell you about who the people that live and work here every day really are.
So there's a lot of QR codes in the game on various packages and communications and other things like that. And basically I think we just chose them as a method for information storage just because they're so annoying. Like, nobody likes QR codes. It's totally the kind of choice that a big company like Venturis or any other of the big companies in the game would choose. And we also really liked the idea that the player could actually scan them and get additional information. Usually that's just like, you know, ingredients or something, but occasionally there's some cute stuff in there.
That's actually cool. Probably see my face now, but like they actually work. That's actually kind of cool. I didn't look at that before. Oops. I turned on the light. There we go. Please focus. Instead of focusing on the whole screen. It's all kind of the same. Like, what is this? This blue one. Intake. Sender. So it's just text as a QR code. Which you can do as well. It's just a way of portraying if you want.
Operations and admin structurally mirror each other a lot, as far as like the types of rooms that were needed for this character's job. So it actually is kind of cute because there are a couple in the game too. So operations feels much more constrained, even though the gym is pretty big, but outside of the gym, things are pretty packed together.
But there was also a huge win for us, which is that when you start to make spaces where people live in them, there's a density of decoration and artifacts that you put around to kind of show that people were there and what they were doing and how it happened. And turns out making that in a really, really big room is hard for us, and in some ways hard for a player too, because you're presented with this big warehouse full of places to go and boxes to open. You can feel like you look in one corner and there's nothing there, then you might just say there's nothing anywhere, and you might get this feeling of numbness, of just finding too many of the same thing.
I kind of like Clive's bunk as an example of that, because the bunks are pretty small in general, because of this sort of more constrained rule that we gave ourselves. Because you walk in and you're basically presented with a lot of his character right away. Like, you see the little table with all the booze on it, and you see his ties are right there. Like, you've sort of got this little Clive diorama. And that's definitely an advantage you get from making more constrained spaces.
One of Clive's themes is kind of past glory, or, you know, glory days kind of thinking, because having a jump ship from his first job, he now looks back on that being like, those were the good old days, and he looks back on his time in college similarly, and he has a lot of fiction that is, you know, from the 60s in London. He has picked photos from old-timey Londontown, and as no one calls it.
Yeah, I think he has a lot of nostalgia, and I think he has a lot of reminders of hopes. Well, and I think it's, you know, it's a way of depicting that he does want more for himself.
Yeah.
And so, you know, something about Tacoma in general, I think, is that it's about a lot of people who are trapped in a situation, and it's a lot of different situations. It's about people's obligations and the friction between what they want and where they are and where they can actually get to from there. And being posted on Tacoma is not a great gig.
Right.
It's not glamorous. And I think Clive's version of that is spending a lot of time thinking back to when he had all the potential from his college football days and to the romantic glory days of old-time London that he didn't actually get to live through, but it's like his idealistic picture of like where he would like to be. And so a lot of his bunk, I think, is a projection of that part of himself.
Yeah.
Poor Clive. Stupid Clive. Bye.
I hadn't seen the showers actually. Let's look at it.
Right in this area, there are multiple instances of, if this was just video recording, there would be, complete nudity
Right.
going on with Nat and Sarah in these situations. And so on the one hand, you're not directly confronted with that, but on the other hand, that means that the fact that you're kind of like being invasive in these private moments takes maybe a little bit longer to sink in.
Right. Once you figure that out, though, you're like, oh, what is this company doing?
Yeah.
And that is...
Yeah. I find it interesting to give the player access to a lot of different elements of these characters' experience, including very private stuff that no one else is supposed to know, or that, only they think of themselves as having access to. And the AR figures give us the ability to put the player in the room in these situations in hopefully a way that kind of walks that line of being kind of uncomfortable when you think about it, but also not being so...
prurient.
Yeah, exactly. As it would have been if you were just standing there at the time.
It's less working blue, but hopefully still emotionally resonant.
Something that was really interesting to think about when designing these scenes was there are points in these scenes where there are no characters in certain rooms. So for instance, here in the locker room, Sarah starts here and then she has part of her scene here and she leaves. And presumably most players will follow her and see where she goes and see how she encounters Andrew. But you might think, well, wait a second, if I was to go into the locker room and wait for Sarah to leave, you're thinking about what might be there. So in each of the main AR scenes, there's one of these AR speakers, and while the characters are there in that space engaged in part of the story, there's music playing in the background from these speakers that kind of accompanies what they're doing. But after they've left, if you hang out with the speaker, you'll hear one of these speeches from Sergio Venturi, the CEO of the Venturis Corporation in the game. And it's something that I hope that players who either intentionally seek these out or just stumble upon one will have that spark of surprise at this extra thing being there and go back and see where else they can find more and really fill out the rest of the story's universe with these little hidden pieces that are kind of, under the surface of what's going on in the AR scenes.
A year that constitutes the first step into this company's bright future, and you've been lucky enough to be an integral part of it. Venturis was founded by my grandfather, Arturo Venturi, over 80 years ago. A serendipitous trip to Singapore, paired with his singular vision for the future of space travel, laid the foundations, literally and figuratively, for the orbital economy as we know it today. Thanks to Venturis, the Ono space elevator linked man to the stars, the fountain of Paradise Spaceport, a bustling hub of commerce that brought a new era of prosperity to our planet. Built on the orbital economy that the space elevator made possible, Earth technology continued to grow and advance in ways we'd never imagined.
This has been a message from your Chief Executive Officer, Sergio Venturi.
I tried to jump. It's not possible. You know.
In our game, characters keep having to deal with something called corporate loyalty, which is the most nightmarish form of, like, value accrual we could think of.
Yeah, I mean, it's influenced by things that are going on now, things like Amazon Prime, for instance, where it's like, well, I'm already paying for Amazon Prime, and it gives me a discount, so I should probably just buy everything through Amazon forever.
Also, somebody totally tweeted a link to an article, like, yesterday about corporate universities.
Something that's interesting about releasing like a speculative fiction thing is that people start bringing you links to things that are like, so this is actually happening in reality now. And yeah, like someone tweeted us a banner ad that was like, unironically, like in our real world, like use company loyalty to pay for student loans.
Yeah.
And it's just like the degree to which things like the concept of corporate loyalty being the currency of people's everyday lives was conceived as being like a very broad extrapolation of something that's happening now becoming way too literal, way too fast is pretty freaky to encounter.
Water bag. Keep going. Stuff as well.
In a game that uses traditional audio diaries, the shape of the space is still the shape of the story, because you go into a room and you find certain audio diaries, then you go into the next room and you find them, and so that is defining the progression of the story as you discover it. But in these AR scenes, they're multi-path, like different characters are moving all over the space in kind of a non-linear way.
And things are happening simultaneously.
Right, there's all this overlap where, you know, two characters might be, you know, in the gym together speaking, but one of them is talking on an AR call and the other one is in the locker room, and they're having two totally separate conversations, but then that have to take the same amount of time so that when their paths connect, they can then speak to each other and then split off again. And all of that stuff required us to, A, write to the space.
Right.
So the process was that like Nina and Tynan blocked out these spaces and put down where all the rooms were and what spaces we had to work with first before we wrote a single word. And then we had to say, okay, you've got the locker room, the gym, cargo, and so then who is where and what are they saying and how long is it going to take Evie to walk from cargo to Clive's office, and what's he doing before she gets there, because there is no... It doesn't matter what she's doing before he gets there because the player will never know. It's like the player can be there.
Yeah.
We have to fill in all of those spaces.
He can't just sit there and wait for like the action to start happening. He has to do something. And so, and of course, when we tried to write all of this stuff out with like these parallel paths, we were totally unable to make everything match up until we physically acted out everything.
Yeah.
And did all the lines ourselves.
Yeah, it was a huge kind of experimental process, I guess, of first discovering how you write it, where you're like, okay, so you have to write each of the sections kind of as its own little scene and then make sure that they all link up. And then to test that, something that was great for us was that we actually had a similar sized development team to the size of the crew in the game. And so yeah, we had to go from words on the page to actually doing basically like dry run rehearsals of it as a group, because you can't really know if the timing of everything lines up until you hear it acted out and you see how the characters moving in the scene are going to affect the timing of everything. We were really glad that we did commit to recording all of the main scenes ensemble style in person, because something that's really common in video game voice recording and in like animation voice recording is that you have each individual actor come in, sit in a booth, record their lines on their own, and then it all gets edited together after the fact. And we felt like because every scene in Tacoma is about these characters being face to face in these very intimate scenes, like the game is about being in the room with these characters while these moments are happening, the quality of the performance completely relied on the actors being there and being able to play off of each other's energy and be in physical proximity while these things were happening, so it would come across in the game.
Yeah, in a lot of ways the whole game is conversational, and at least the scenes, and yeah, just having the actors physically present and able to talk to each other and look each other in the eye just added like immeasurably to the quality of the recording.
It was also really cool to see how excited the actors were to be able to perform their parts together in person on stage, because it's just an opportunity that I think in a lot of games and animation you just don't have the chance to be involved with, and so we really want to thank our voice coordinator, Michael Surix, who arranged all of the logistics of like getting a soundstage together and getting everybody in the same place at the same time, which is not easy.
All the way down to coming up with a scheme for taping the mics to the actors' foreheads so that they would get the least amount of interference from clothing and like skin movement as their faces moved while they spoke.
I mean, that's one of the big challenges, is that if you're recording a scene like this for the screen, you can have a boom mic that's just picking up everybody's lines. But with Tacoma, each character's voice has to follow their individual character model as they move around the space. And if I'm standing between Andrew and Sarah while they're talking, I have to hear Andrew out of my left ear and Sarah out of my right ear. So that means that Mike had to get over all of the logistical challenges of, we need to have people that are face to face, like inches away from each other, but also each of them needs to have only their own voice picked up and recorded and isolated separately so that they can follow the characters around in the game. So it was a big technical challenge and a really cool experience to get to see the scenes that we had written and practiced and kind of just done as amateurs in our studio being performed by these incredibly talented people there in front of us on a soundstage. It was really cool.
We have a station cat.
Well, look, a cat.
Oh, hi.
Oh.
This cat, who belongs to Evie, is named Margaret Catwood.
That's right. Which, you can find one of these cats in each of the main AR scenes. So the cat didn't have a name for a long time, and our rationale for that was that when you see the characters' name tags in AR, it's because the company is officially tracking them and has that information in their crew profile. And we knew that, Venturis would want to know if there were creatures on the station, like a cat. So it would be tracked in the system, but like Venturis doesn't care what the cat's name is. It doesn't have like a crew file about their cat. But then near the end of development, we put in a thing that Nat had put in a list of what everybody was doing. We included the cat in that, and so
Nat.
Right, because Nat's like she's a goof, and at that point it's like, all right, well, she's gonna put in the cat. She's not gonna just refer to it as like the cat. So I just went into our Slack channel and I was like, so what's the cat's name? And I think like 3 seconds later, Carla replied with just Margaret Catwood, and I was like, done.
I think that had been in the back of my head. I actually considered naming my cat that at one point, and then I was like, no, it's perfect for this.
That's very good. But yeah, it seemed like an appropriately silly name for the station cat.
Why there's so many QR codes in this game? Why haven't I seen those before? What is this? Loyalty bonus begins once qualifying referred application completes their certification and attains a full-time position with Venturis. Bonus loyalty is only valid while referred applicant remains employed with Venturis. Loyalty may not be redeemed before the end of the 12-month bonus period. Venturis Technologies CM awaits your application. Why are those even QR codes also? Orbital certification in as little as 6 months. Could actually hear my phone. And now I want to know all the QR codes at this point. Why are there even so many? Why did I think it was a good idea?
I did learn to make some shaders, some custom shaders for Tacoma. So the character's look has changed a lot since we first started working on Tacoma. The story also changed a little bit, and originally there was a character that was supposed to look glitched and corrupt compared to the main characters. And when I made that character, I worked with vertex distortion, and so they look kind of wiggly as they're moving around. And it turned out that Steve and Carla really liked that look, and so we implemented that into all the other characters' shaders. So anyway, so that's why they kind of have like a distorted look as they're walking around. And from there, a bunch of other things were added, like when they walk through another mesh or touch another mesh. Like if they're touching the table, their fingers will kind of glow. And if they're walking through a door, their bodies will kind of glow as they're walking through the door mesh. So yeah, good old shaders.
Thanks for offering to help.
Clive, may I come in?
Germ, I must... Rounding soul, then? Yes, come on in, love. So are you rounding soul, then? Oh, tremendous. So are you rounding soul? So are you rounding soul? So are you rounding soul, then? 8 months.
So many things in this game. You don't really see it first. There we go.
Like that.
Let's see what happens if we exit now. Oh, we need to complete it.
Specialist. Oh my god. Nat, you're not even renewed yet.
Now, Nicholas. Nicholas? Hello?
Teams, huh?
Which I love, completely mindless, busy.
There we go.
Thanks for offering to help. You have everything you need?
I didn't know there was a station cat even. Let's go this way.
I trust you got back to terra firma safely. No.
There we go.
You're already headed back out towards...
Clive, may I come in?
Can take it. Can move up. Or move on rather. go. Through the lag. Biomedical. Out reading the email. There we go.
So transfer shafts. These are the thing you either just went in or are about to, which takes you from the hub to a wing, and it's kind of internal studio speak for the process the player is going through, the player character, where they grab onto a little sled inside of this long arm that goes from the hub all the way to the wing, and it takes them down there, drops them off, and it safely conveys them from 0G to gravity or the reverse.
And if you're going along the transfer shaft and thinking, my, this is taking a long time, it's because we're loading stuff in the background.
Yes, and for that reason, it's actually the only part of the station, the 3 transfer shafts are actually the only parts of the station that are always loaded the whole time that you play. Another detail I really like is the way the boots light up whenever they magnetize, which you also see in the entryway. It was something that it took me a while to realize that was what was going on, but that's the kind of deep thinking about how things work that I really appreciate in the station overall. It's pretty cool.
They're like his little coded communiques.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People have tweeted like screenshots at us and called out these messages that kind of break into the player's AR interface sometimes, that are things like, it should be saying AR crew member record recovered, but then it says something like death sentence suddenly.
Which
and
is a
then,
surprise to some people.
Goes away again. Odin doesn't know what Amy's motives are. Like, as far as he knows, she's really there to take him back to Venturis and for him to be wiped. And so we wanted him to be trying to communicate with her and say, like, no, don't do this. And so for a while, I think we talked about, like, are we going to do this through, like, audio that cuts in or, like, some new interface thing that you see in different places? And then we had that realization that there are these kind of system messages, like when you're transferring into a wing or when you're recovering an AR scene, that he could subvert those via text that Amy's already seeing and just change what the meaning is, even if it's briefly. So yeah, I don't know how many people really are like conscious of these or how many make the connection, but I think hopefully by the end of the game you have that feeling, oh, that this was Odin all along.
Yeah, and there's a whole progression. You can see his feelings about Amy change as time goes on.
That's true. Yeah, it starts out him seeming kind of scared or panicking, and then I think by the end of the game he's starting to almost give her the benefit of the doubt or say, like, I don't have any choice but to trust you, basically.
It seems like he's starting to have a little bit of hope at the end, I think. But,
yeah.
So Carla hooked us up with a botanist, and we chatted about what plants would be good to grow in a space station.
Yes.
And she was like, well, this is the sort of lighting conditions that would be good for plants, and if you're looking for something highly protein based, then you should grow some amaranth. And she suggested all these plants that would be good in like low level lighting, etc. And then I put a bunch of squash in there and tomatoes and stuff that wasn't at all what she suggested.
Well,
And so,
the other thing though is that like we have the grow lights for them.
Yeah.
Like they don't need to grow in natural, space station light. And we also totally did take their advice with the just oxygen producers, like the snake plants and everything. Those are legit, real life NASA choices.
yes. They filtered formaldehyde.
The other thing is that our station didn't have to actually run on just plants,
Yeah. If you know what the rules are, then you can break them all over the place, I suppose. Or decide to
That is
throw them
true.
out the window.
There's a few different specific callbacks to our last game, Gone Home, in Tacoma. We are pretty directly implying that they take place in the same universe because there's a gardening book written by Sam's mom from Gone Home that you can also find here in the Botany Wing. So some of them are pretty direct. But this one that we're near right now...
That's pretty direct also.
It's fairly direct, but it's not like the same object. It's just a mug that says jazz
You think
on
people
it.
have jazz mugs in real life?
Well, a lot of people do now. They bought them from Topatico.com.
Son of a gun.
We made it happen. We ruined people's kitchens.
It's true.
But
we don't have this for merchandise.
No.
Don't get excited about that.
As far as direct Gone Home callbacks go, there's the Janice Greenbrier book, there's the jazz mug, and then there's the Christmas duck that you find in the empty storage bunk in the network technology module
And it
later
lights
in the
up.
game. That's true. And
Unlike
it plays
Jan's
a little
book.
song for you. Yeah.
Or the jazz mug.
True. Nothing else
Honestly.
lights up and plays you a little song.
What a ripoff.
The AR game in Andrew's bunk is called Spitfire Returns, which is implied to be a sequel to Super Spitfire that you found in Gone Home, which is the like
Itself.
Super Nintendo version of the kind of like vector graphics Spitfire game that is playable in Minerva's Den for BioShock 2. So that's like the one thing that actually, in a lot of ways, carries through the most directly from all three of those titles. The basketball Easter egg, I guess, is something that
God.
we took from System Shock 2 as an homage in Gone Home and then carried forward into Tacoma as well.
We didn't put it in Minerva's Den.
Yeah, there's no basketballs.
We did a bad job. Should have made one.
Sorry, everybody.
You're not sorry.
I know.
So the tea garden at the end of the long hall here in Botany, if you go there, it's one of the few places in the station where it's almost entirely window. Hopefully some people caught it. There's a small and completely serendipitous result, which is when you're actually looking out here and you wait for the other wings to come around, you can see the burst oxygen tanks that are a central plot point. And in fact, you can see those from any place in the game. If you look out the window, they're there from the very first second of the game. But it was just kind of an accident. We built this whole wing, and we were deciding how to align the station in respect to how the wing was lined up. And I did this accidentally and put this right here because I really wanted to look out onto the solar panels of the station. And then I just saw the tanks kind of drift by slowly, so it was pretty cool.
So an accident.
So the propulsion suits are never actually called out in the lore of the game, but the idea behind them is that each crew member has a couple of them in their bunks, and that they're used to sort of traverse the central hub, which is a microgravity environment, unlike the rest of the station. So they have little air jets placed in the fabric of strategic areas, kind of on the arms, the hips, and the legs. and there's little jets let the user move in kind of a controlled way through this giant space. And it also lets us make like a uniform for the Tacoma station that we can kind of personalize with like a name tag for each crew member. I did a little concept for them. It's just the idea behind them was sort of like a space coverall, something not too glamorous, but it's fun. I got to use ZBrush, which is a sort of like a clay sculpting program, and sort of snuck them in everyone's closet.
So a lot of Tacoma's character dynamics are about trust and who trusts who with what, in what context, all those sorts of things. I think we see a lot of that in the botany module specifically. We see, Evie telling the crew, here's our plan and it's going to work, and then when she's in private with Clive saying, this plan isn't going to work, like, what are you thinking? And then I think that you can kind of contrast how both Andrew and Sarah trust and confide in Odin, but Sarah confides in Odin as like a personality, and Andrew confides in Odin with like his real worries, and saying, what I've said is we should just trust the company and do what they say, and then as soon as I'm alone in a room with Odin, I'm saying, how likely is it really that they're going to come pick us up? How sure should I be about this, even though I'm acting totally sure in front of everybody else?
Yeah, and Andrew doesn't quite treat Odin like a person.
Right.
But like, yeah, he's at least confident in Odin's ability to not spill his information.
Right. He trusts Odin as a source of information.
Right.
And as, this
as an
thing.
analyst,
this thing that he can acknowledge his own uncertainty in front of, in a way that he wouldn't in front of a human.
Right,
in
like
this situation.
That sort of like, your pet doesn't care if you're wearing pants kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's that.
True.
Andrew doesn't wear his pants in front of Odin. The end.
Andrew isn't wearing pants the entire game.
And you didn't know it.
How could you?
Everybody was cool with it. Sarah's panic attack also came late in the development of the game. I think it was actually the last, AR scene that got written. Botany had originally been a much shorter sequence, and we wanted to expand it to include more characterization between Evie and Clive in the tea garden, and to give Andrew more time with Odin to kind of talk through how he was really feeling after he and Sarah split off.
Commensurately.
Right, that left this
us with
space
time,
where we knew that we wanted Sarah to meet up with Evie and Clive at the end of the scene, so she couldn't just leave, but she had to go do something. And that led us to say, what's she doing in this time gap? And Sarah has, I think, a lot of she takes on a lot of that responsibility of having suppressed her own outward emotion to be taking care of the crew. She's the doctor, but also she's trying to hold this plan together, and she has people confiding in her that she's kind of holding all these things inside. And we wanted to have this moment where it's just her and Odin, and her being able to actually externalize how hard this is for her, and have Odin help her through that in this way that shows this isn't the first time that this happened. They have this kind of familiar ritual that they go through when Sarah needs help.
Yeah, I think that personal emotional displays like this just feel a lot more engaging to us than, for example, characters screaming at each other because they've lost patience and stuff like that. I think that there's something about seeing what happens to a person when they're by themselves under stress, or I suppose with an AI.
Yeah.
But there's something there that is, it just feels like it rings true.
we were really grateful to have some friends in the industry and artists that we know contribute some cool pieces of art to the game. For instance, the pinup poster in Bert's locker in the locker room was by Mariel Cartwright, who was the lead animator on Skullgirls and is the art director of the game Indivisible. And then very nearby to that, there's the cover of the Zero Spiel ebook on Sarah's desktop, which is like a multi-layered reference because in Firewatch, they were kind enough to put one of the books from Gone Home findable in their game. Ollie Moss, who was Firewatch's art director and did the book covers for the 1 through 10 books for that game, did a really cool kind of visual pun roulette wheel space station book cover for Zero Spiel in Tacoma. Also, some of us did drawings for the game.
Our programmer Hannah did programmer art for Nat. She ghost drew Nat's doodles.
Right.
And
drew those very good Tyrannosauruses. Yep. And in Nat's office, you can find a bunch of Post-it notes on her desk that are just different little doodles of Odin. And we actually assigned Hannah to just draw doodles of Odin over the course of a few months while she was at her desk waiting for builds to finish or whatever. And then one day she just handed us a bunch of sticky notes and was like, here they are. And now they're on Nat's desk. Carla did all of Andrew's drawings.
Yes.
So his sketches from life of flowers and
his orchids
statues and stuff.
And stuff like that. And also Nicholas's doofy drawing of Andrew floating in space and yelling at him about homework.
Right. And then I did Bert's drawing of Nat that you find next to Bert's workstation. So yeah, we have this thing where we have different individual people play different characters through their handwriting, and sometimes we have them play different characters through their drawings.
1, 2, 3.
Vat meat. It even sounded bad like vat meat.
That's because it is bad.
Ugh.
I mean, it's also good.
It's very good.
I mean,
powerfully bad.
Obviously.
The way we were looking at it was, if you're on this long posting, then like fresh food would be one of the most desirable things that you could have. And so they have the tomatoes and the squash and the mushrooms, and then also in our fiction, what we speculate is that the vast majority of all meat that would be eaten on Earth is produced in a lab, not in a factory farm, because that's become much more efficient than producing animals. And so also they can use that process on the space station, so they can produce meat protein right on site and turn it into whatever meals they want.
Why not? Why not vat meat?
They also make terrible noises. Whenever you go near these things, they do a lot of squooshing and squanching.
Thanks to Patrick.
Which, thank you, Patrick, for making our vat meat grosser than necessary.
Oh, it's necessary.
Exactly as gross as necessary.
Precisely. Vat meat.
It's good.
Sure it is.
Sure.
This is one of 3 places in the game where you can decipher a code for a key code door by observing one of the characters in the AR scene actually inputting it.
We didn't initially have that as like a mechanical concept.
That's right. That is something that we had initially only had like go find the code somewhere and bring it back, but we saw playtesters like watching when the characters go through the door and looking at the key code, input pad, and being like, oh, I was really hoping I could just figure it out from watching them. So we were like, we can do that.
And we did it.
Yeah. So, that was the point where we were like, we don't want to cut the other ways to get the code that are in the game. We want there to be multiple ways to do it. Because I think there's this feeling of, even if you get every code by just watching the character put it in, but then later you see that code somewhere else and you're like, oh, I could have gotten it this way. That's a cool feeling for the player to know that there was more than one way that they could have solved that problem. They see evidence of it, and kind of the way they got through it was up to how they were playing. Yeah.
Nice.
So in Tacoma, one of the interesting things we got to do with the scenes is have characters interact with the world, but the world is in a different state than it was when the characters were interacting with it. So the difference between the world that you're looking at and the world that the characters were inhabiting is hopefully visible via their actions, but not in any other way.
Right.
Yeah, here in the irrigation room, there's a good example of this where if you're watching Andrew when he's talking to Sarah, there's one point where he is walking across the room and it looks like he's holding something and it happens to be the hose that's on the ground, and you'll see the characters at the beginning walking through the hose, and then later in the scene, once he had hooked up the hose across the room, you'll see the characters step over it. So that's kind of a good example of showing both states.
Yeah, there's some other places where you only see the aftermath, like in medical, the storage room is all messed up.
This weird little stone is Andrew's. So in Tacoma, one of the interesting things we got to do with the scenes is have characters interact with the world, but the world is in a different state than it was when the characters were interacting with it. So the difference between the world that you're looking at and the world that the characters were inhabiting is hopefully visible via their actions, but not in any other way.
Right.
Yeah, here in the irrigation room, there's a good example of this where if you're watching Andrew when he's talking to Sarah, there's one point where he is walking across the room and it looks like he's holding something and it happens to be the hose that's on the ground, and you'll see the characters at the beginning walking through the hose, and then later in the scene, once he had hooked up the hose across the room, you'll see the characters step over it. So that's kind of a good example of showing both states.
Yeah, there's some other places where you only see the aftermath, like in medical, the storage room is all messed up and the shelves are knocked down, and that's what happens at the very end of the scene. But yeah, in irrigation here, you actually get to see the before and the after and the during kind of all in one place.
Yeah, the only other one I can think of is the drone, which when it explodes, it gets tilted on its stand, and so everyone's interacting with it in slightly the wrong place.
Right, and Bert is climbing up a ladder that has fallen
been knocked
onto
over
the floor and stuff like
and
that.
Using controls that are touching things that are now covered by what's that stuff called?
Foam.
Yeah.
Good commentary.
Just say foam again like that.
Oh, foam.
This weird little stone is Andrew's shaping stone that he's been working on. Stone shaping is a sort of meditative practice that we made up.
True.
That you're supposed to basically just take some kind of relatively soft stone in a vaguely spherical chunk and just rub it with your hands so that it slowly is worn down into a smooth shape.
Yeah. Andrew's family kind of brought this meditative practice with them, and then he is carrying it on and lived it and practiced it in his own life.
And that's concretized by the fact that two of the stones up in his office belonged to his grandmother, and that she had actually worked on them for her entire life. Also, we have Andrew's cigarettes here because he's a secret smoker, much like Nat, and smoking normal cigarettes would be an incredibly terrible idea on a space station. You don't want to have an open flame anywhere on a space station where you rely on oxygen to, be there. So we thought smoking was expressive enough that we wanted to have cigarettes anyway, and so we made up a variety of cigarettes that did not actually flame, but
they are self-vaporizing, effectively. Right. So I think what we posited was that they had microscopic electric filaments in them, and then when you drew on them with your breath, it would activate those filaments and vaporize part of the cigarette, and that's what you're smoking.
So they heat, but they don't they never cause it to actually catch fire.
picture. There you go. I like way of cutting every commentary. Out again.
So this is medical. So it has facilities like exam room, but it also has kind of storage for med supplies and any device that would be needed to check in on people medically. Very early on, the design of this space came from the story as it was at the time. So the story was written where Sarah and Andrew went through kind of a dramatic arc here, and that dramatic arc had moments, and those moments built so that the place was designed around making those moments happen in a very specific order. So what happened is we did that. We made a space where you're watching the AR scene and Sarah goes off into a room, but the room is locked. You can't get through the locked door until you go watch another part of the scene and get a key to unlock it. And to build that and to make them walk a certain way and go off in a certain area, building the space to the AR scene ended up with this very awkward space. So we ended up scrapping that, but it did take trying it to go, let's design a space to the AR scene, and where we ended up was much more functional to the purpose of the wing and who would work there and who would live there and how would they live and how would they work.
And I really like that sort of a neat outcome of having the AR scene blocked out in a space that already existed specifically in this wing in medical, is that you have moments like sort of later in the scene when Nat and Bert are having their little like flirtatious moment where Nat jumps onto Bert. She sort of like tackle hugs her. Mm-hmm. There's this interesting outcome where that happens in one room, and then it just so happens that Sarah's office is literally on the other side of the wall. So if you stand in Sarah's office and are standing sort of next to Sarah when Nat tackle hugs Bert, you can hear that through the wall. And Sarah and Andrew actually do react to that in the scene. And I thought that's like kind of a fun outcome. Like, we didn't plan that. That's just kind of how the AR scene ended up playing out based on how the space is laid out.
Why is there a skeleton?
You as a player might notice a few different references to Tina in the game. There's the screaming Tina that you might see on the specialty cocktails board in the kitchen, which you then may later discover refers to the skeleton here in Med, that you can put the skull back on the skeleton and then put the hat on the skull, and the hat is labeled Tina, which means the skeleton's name is Tina. But all of this Tina nonsense is a reference to our next door office mate. The office that we made Tacoma in is in an old building with thin walls. And there was a company next door to ours that we would hear this woman screaming through the wall with some frequency, either because she was so angry or so amused by things.
Just shrieking, like, most of the time.
A lot of the time. Tina was very energetic.
Yeah.
So to be clear, her name wasn't Tina.
No. Steve just made it up at one point.
We were like, we always hear this woman screaming through the wall of our office. We have to be able to refer to her as something.
Rather than like go over and introduce ourselves and like ask her what her name was, we were like, well, we'll just name this phenomenon Tina.
And part of that is because there were two women that worked in the office next door to ours. And so since we only ever heard the screaming through the wall, we didn't know who in the office it actually was. And so for years, we were conjecturing about which of the women in that office was Tina. And then they moved out, like shortly before the end of the development of Tacoma. And one day, soon before they moved out, I heard Tina's voice screaming and saying, "Oh my fucking god!" over on one side of the office. And then Tina, on the other side of the office, respond with, "Are you fucking kidding me?" And I realized it was both of them, and they both screamed like that all the time, and that's why we heard so much screaming over there.
So they had a corporate culture of screaming.
So we wanted to pay homage to Tina in the game. We figured a screaming skeleton was probably a good way to do that. Thanks, Tina. So this is one of the areas that you get into by using a physical key, which is only a couple of in the game. But there's a few different ways that we lock off information. There's physical keys and there's key code doors, and sometimes there's just stuff that's harder to find because of where it's placed. Because there is this hierarchy of accessibility or findability of space, we also tend to map that towards kind of the deeper or more obscure,
more ancillary, less central, I guess.
Right. Less central, but hopefully more valuable to people who are looking to find all of the detail in the game, right? Like, the thing you're doing as a designer is you have this contract with the player that says, like, if you follow us through all of these prompts, if you see a key, it's saying you can go use it, and if you go use it, you'll get something that made you happy that you actually bothered. And if we
waste your time.
Right. And if we waste your time and say, like, haha, there was nothing in there, or you were like, well, I already knew that, why did I go to all this trouble, then, like, the next time you see a key, you're not going to want to use it. And then we've lost someone who otherwise might want to actually engage with all this stuff that we put in front of you.
We want to safeguard the player's goodwill and interest
and value the time that they're putting into the game, and the effort that they're putting into the game.
It's a fun challenge sometimes to make something that is juicy enough to be like, oh, I am glad I found that, but that is not, what the character specifically hangs on. So this book here is actually written by an AI, one of the major Venturas AIs, called Fand, who's in charge of Kiribati City-State. Fand is really the only other positive, successful-seeming AI that acts the most human in our fiction. She's written this book here about how she came to, reorganize her domain.
But it's also kind of like a philosophical book about mindfulness, which I think is a really interesting aspect of consciousness for an AI to be thinking about and to become an authority on. This book was something that Carla put together. We had agreed that we were like, oh, we should have a book that was written by an AI to show more of what different AIs are in our world, so it doesn't just seem like it's Odin. And then I guess there's other AIs, but to actually have some examples. And so this was Carla's version of, like, what is an interesting additional perspective for an AI to represent. And I thought this almost like enlightened Buddhist seeming perspective that this AI presumably has developed over years and years of observation and kind of examining its own ways of working and how people relate to each other and stuff, felt like a legitimate thing that could happen with the concept of AI, but definitely not something that we had seen anywhere else within our fictional world. Sarah ends up being kind of the Ellen Ripley character of the game, but she didn't start as that character when we were writing the game. We really started from who the characters were and what their roles were, and then fit them into a plot. And I think that as we were going along, by getting to know Sarah, we realized that she made the most sense to be the person who would, in a way, kind of like team up with Odin to pull off this plan in the end.
Yeah, no one else's relationship with Odin is really as personal at all. Like, even Nat, whose job it is to work with him, she treats him as a project a little bit, or a pet, and it's just not
or a problem to solve
same.
Or a system. It was interesting for us to get a feel for Sarah and kind of realize she has a kind of like boldness to her and a determination to her, even if she also has these internal struggles with like anxiety and everything. And we discovered that she's the kind of person that if she was put into this kind of like high pressure do or die situation, she would just do her best to do it. She would kind of rise to that occasion, and she ends up being the only person that can do that. And I think we get to see how she follows through. Oops.
Tacoma Station went through this big overhaul partway through development. And the first version of the station was this microgravity station where everything floated, there was no gravity whatsoever. And so it was designed as such. It was designed like the ISS so that objects like the sinks and the toilets, were to be used in microgravity. So, you know, when a user was, or a crew member was, you know, using them, they wouldn't spray water all over the place. They wouldn't float away when they were trying to actually like use the toilet, it would be an actual concern. And so they do look a little strange. They're kind of legacy objects in the grand scheme of things, in that they are some of the earliest models in the game. And the medical bed is another. Originally, it used to have little foot braces, and it still has the straps of back in the day when one of the first rooms we actually made in the old station was the doctor's room, Sarah's room. And so we added those details so that a patient wouldn't float away. So the straps are still there, and actually the toilet's got a reskin. But why we still kept those models in the game is just because, you know, when you're doing small independent development, there's only so much bandwidth that you have, and the time it takes to actually redo an entire model is not insubstantial, especially when there's only 1 or 2 full-time modelers on the crew. So we reskin them and we kept them, and you know, it's one of those things where you got to pick your battles. And surely, I mean, I kind of like them, so it's you know, I'm not too worried about it.
When you look at a character's collection of books, like when you look at Sarah's books here in her office, I think that we tried to reinforce some of the themes or some of the characters' main concerns or interests or anxieties through what they had on their bookshelves. So with Sarah, you know, she's a doctor, so she has health and nutrition and you know, doctor stuff, but she also is a reader and a thoughtful person, so she has fiction and poetry, and she also has a lot of anxiety, so there's sort of both meditation and books specifically about dealing with anxiety. And she also comes from a Muslim background, and I think through the books you get the idea that she looks at her faith from almost like an academic perspective or an analytical perspective, and I think you can tell that almost exclusively through looking at what kinds of books she keeps in her personal spaces.
Additionally, we got to project some of our own likes and dislikes onto the characters, because, you know, in order to fill out someone's library, it's pretty hard to keep everything completely on topic.
Right.
Yeah, I believe Nina requested the William Carlos Williams book, and a couple others here and there.
And we have Alice Munro and
Margaret Atwood.
And Margaret Atwood.
And Deepness in the Sky is one of my favorites. Unlike in a lot of popular fiction, our version of cryogenic stasis is not something you can do long term. It's not like in Alien where you just kind of are out for a few years and wake up in some star system. It's much more unstable and short term than that.
Yeah. You're in cryo so that you can get to surgery, but not so that you can just be preserved for an indefinite amount of time. Yeah. What we're seeing in the crew medical charts that are here in the exam room is the idea that most people in the situation of the crews, and if they had to go into cryo for, you know, a couple or a few days, they would probably be fine. But part of that, in the case of the crew of Tacoma, is that most people in developed countries in our fiction get a selection of gene filtering procedures done to them, like in utero, and it's sort of along the lines of people getting vaccines now, but it's being able to tweak people's genes to make them not be susceptible to certain congenital illnesses or you know, other conditions. But when you look at these charts, it turns out that Nat never had any gene filtering done, and so because of her condition, it makes it much, much more dangerous for her as an individual.
Yeah, I think we figured out that mitral stenosis would be a particularly dangerous condition to have if you were going to be basically hypothermic for long periods of time. That's actually like a real danger, so...
I want to get a code. No, there. I can find it. Oh well. Here we can go with. So it is 2080. Bad heart. Cool. Ah, he didn't have this one.
So, about the visual design, I feel like a lot of the design came from, the art side.
Yeah. Well, Rebecca Mock gave us the concept art. Rebecca's a great concept artist, and she does comics as well, and does illustrations for editorial work. The exterior of the station was one of her designs, and basically I was very lucky because I just got to look at her work and try and replicate it, or translate it, in so much as, she's used to drawing in a 2D way, and I have to translate that into this crazy 3D model. But yeah, it was definitely the biggest model I worked with, and probably the most. I came back to it for the most revisions over the course of about a year or so, and it's a big one. At the end, I was like, okay, it was a little overwhelming, but seeing it now moving and whatnot and all hooked up, it's pretty cool.
Where's the last one?
So this is medical. So it has facilities like exam room, but it also has kind of storage for med supplies and any device that would be needed to check in on people medically. Very early on, the design of this space came from the story as it was at the time. So the story was written where Sarah and Andrew went through kind of a dramatic arc here, and that dramatic arc had moments, and those moments built so that the place was designed around making those moments happen in a very specific order. So what happened is we did that. We made a space where you're watching the AR scene and Sarah goes off into a room, but the room is locked. You can't get through the locked door until you go watch another part of the scene and get a key to unlock it. And to build that and to make them walk a certain way and go off in a certain area, building the space to the AR scene ended up with this very awkward space. So we ended up scrapping that, but it did take trying it to go, let's design a space to the AR scene, and where we ended up was much more functional to the purpose of the wing and who would work there and who would live there and how would they live and how would they work.
And I really like that sort of a neat outcome of having the AR scene blocked out in a space that already existed specifically in this wing in medical, is that you have moments like sort of later in the scene when Nat and Bert are having their little like flirtatious moment where Nat jumps onto Bert. She sort of like tackle hugs her.
So this is one question I have, because I don't remember how we got to it, but there was a lot of iteration on the design of the AR desktops, but what we settled on was kind of the horseshoe icons, which I think came from you. The horseshoe bat.
Yeah. Well, we started out with the earliest versions of it being a grid of screens almost that would pop up in front of the player's vision.
That felt kind of disorganized, so we brought things in for a short time to make it kind of like a taskbar at the bottom, which I think a lot of people are used to, which is why we went that way. You know? A lot of phones, a lot of desktops use that.
And also that also wasn't using the player's visual field, really. It was just still behaving like a flat computer screen. And so, we did the strange decision of bending it into a horseshoe shape so that it could surround the center of the player, or I guess character's visual field.
Instead of having it function like an actual phone where you have to like look at it, the AR desktop takes advantage of the fact that it's actually in the world in front of you. You're not holding anything. You don't have to like look down at an object. It can just be in your peripheral vision and you can look from side to side at it.
It is partially a realistic usage scenario and partially also so that the player could actually see the world while looking at it. And yes, it makes a horseshoe bat.
Oops. There you go. Got the last few pieces. And an emo. Go.
Here we are in the hub.
Yeah.
It's big.
It is very big. Actually, that was one of my concerns when we sort of first started making the hub, was that you just sort of get thrown into this giant space. There's a lot going on. There's little guys flying around.
It's one of the only spaces in the entire game that feels very spaceship to me.
Yeah.
You go from here to a space that feels a lot more terrestrial, that feels a lot more grounded, and it's easy to get around, and you tend not to lose your bearings. And we help the player move through the space with landmarking and lighting and stuff. And then you come back to here after that, and you're like, oh, I'm in space. Oh yeah, I remember. Yeah. Here I am in space again, and it's disorienting and it's weird. It's kind of unsettling. I think that kind of works about it because you're not playing the game in here, and the game isn't really about getting from A to B. So it's really kind of
playing basketball.
It's playing basketball, and it's also kind of, I always felt like this part was just kind of an intermission in the game. You like come here to kind of take a breath.
So with regards to art direction, when we originally conceived of the station, we were talking about wall colors for each of the wings, and we wanted each wing to be the color of the crew member who lived in it. So Evie's is purple, so originally the kitchen was as a nice purple color, and the wing you're standing in now in engineering would be orange to match Bert, etc. But 6 colors is a lot of colors, and so in the interest of simplicity, we chose just one central color for each of the 3 wings, and they're not particularly tied to any character. They're just nice to look at or evoked a nice feeling. So green for personnel, blue for biomed, and an industrial-ish orange for engineering. Paring things down or opting for simplicity is something that I, as an art person, I found I rarely regret, and especially as it pertains to player flow. The idea of having 6 different colors, I could see how that would get confusing after a while, and so we sort of opted to go the way that we did, and I think that it really helps with regards to landmarking. You realize you're in the same wing, and then you'll traverse to a different wing, and it's a different color, and you're in a different area. So I'm glad that we sort of simplified things the way we did.
The reason we made the sync device functionality be so obscured to the player was because early in development we were having trouble with progression systems and keys and locks, and people getting too focused in on locks that we were setting up in the game and sort of ignoring the story to find passwords and stuff. So the sync device was sort of a solution for us to have a gating system, but one that the player didn't feel like they needed to like spend all their time paying attention to, because the idea is that it's like almost like a USB stick where you're downloading stuff, and that's the kind of thing that just takes time and that you don't have to pay attention to, and people generally know that who use computers know that kind of paradigm. So that was sort of like the original idea for why the sync device is sort of this like obscure thing that's just like downloading away. Why we're not like having you have to keep track of like every single little thing you're doing and how it affects the percentage. Like, it doesn't really matter. It's just about like you exploring space and not having to worry about it.
The hope is that you stand in front of it and you plug the sync device in and you watch it tick slowly to 0.1 and then you're like, oh well,
yeah,
no, I'm gonna go look at other stuff.
Yeah, exactly. We're in mechanical engineering, which is Bert's zone. One of the big considerations when we were working on designing each level in Tacoma, each wing, was how does the player sort of encounter each room and in what order? For example, we have most of the bunks be kind of like tucked away in the back of each wing, usually with sort of an entryway or a longer hallway that kind of separates it from the main working areas.
We did a lot of tricks. For a time, there was even kind of this idea of an airlock where there were 2 doors you had to go through to get to everybody's bedroom. And then you can see in Mech, there's an example of an elevation change. We tried as much to make them feel like they were lower or higher than the rest of the space, so you kind of had to go upstairs to get to the bedroom.
And that was so that, we could have these working spaces where we would imagine, Bert would come out and, do her mechanical engineering work during the day, and then going home for her, she at least has this sort of, separation of work and personal space and not just be, living in your office.
Right.
So, yeah, each wing is sort of designed to have the working spaces be accessible in an order that makes sense, and to have the bunks in the back to give characters a sense of personal space.
So the bounce sliding is specifically referring to the idea that when the sun comes through in some spaces and hits certain surfaces, we try to make it look like the whole room changes temperature and sometimes warms up. Most rooms that have a large pool of sunlight that moves through actually has a floating point light that's just sitting there, and that point light is one color, and it is on a timer that is linked to the angle of the sun, and when the angle of the sun hits X or Y, it warms up or cools down. And for me, and I don't know if this hit you as well, but it made it feel a lot like a plane. For me, when I'm in a plane and the plane banks or the sun setting or something, it's changed in the plane and the light starts coming through in a different way, and you see it go across the ceiling, and then the room temperature changes and it becomes a little golden and a little orange, and it's just this. You can be watching a movie in the back of a seat at a plane, and then suddenly you're like, oh, I'm flying through the air.
Yeah, I think it's lovely. I think it's a really nice effect. The drone bay, the bones of it, are based on this wonderful piece of concept art we have by Rebecca Mock, who has long been one of my favorite illustrators. So I wasn't able really to hit all of the details here in our concept art for the final room, but I think we managed to get the broad strokes of it, and some of the assets like the door up at the top we had to reuse from previous versions of the station or previous areas in the station. But I think it turned out pretty cool and pretty dramatic, and I like this room a lot because it feels like a stage in how theatrical it is. How it has that central focus of the drone itself and the raised areas and basically actors. And it was one of the final rooms I think to actually come together. But yeah, drone room, I really like it.
There's this scene in the drone bay between Nat and Bert where the two of them are in this terrible accident together and they're both injured. And this is something where, when we arrived at this being one of the scenes in the game, I kind of naturally had to draw from an experience I had where my wife and I were in a motorbike accident. And, you know, that was a really traumatic, scary experience for me. Yeah, I think probably the hardest part of that to relive or draw from is, you know, there's the part in that scene where Bert is thrown off the ladder and hits her head and is knocked out, and Nat also falls down the ramp, but then she turns and just sees Bert lying there and calls out to her and doesn't get any response. And, you know, I have a very vivid memory. In our accident, a car ran a red light and went right in front of us, and the motorbike went straight into the side of the car, and I was thrown into the intersection, and Rachel just hit the side of the car and ended up basically right where the accident happened. And so, you know, I was thrown probably a couple dozen feet and ended up in the middle of the intersection. And, you know, first I saw that my leg was broken, and I was like, I probably shouldn't look at that anymore. And then I looked over and saw Rachel lying there with her back to me, just like in the fetal position on the ground, just not moving. And, you know, I called out to her, and I didn't know if she was alive or not. And that's a crazy position to be in. And that's the position that Nat was in. It's just like, I see you lying there, I don't know what's happened to you. And I can't. Because I, like, the kind of, like, unbearable moment in that scene where Nat is just, like, dragging herself across the floor to Bert is, like, something that I didn't do because I started to, and then people ran up to me and were like, stop. Like, okay, like, I'm gonna go check on her, you stay here, right? But, you know, that moment of uncertainty when somebody you care about is, like, clearly injured and you don't know how bad. It was a crazy thing to live through, and I'm glad that, you know, for us it worked out because we're both pretty much fine now. You know, it was one of those things where when I realized I was writing this scene, I kind of knew some of the things that had to go into it, but it doesn't always make it that easy to actually have to, like, live back through to put it into the game. Yeah, Bert, in fact, is engaged with decorating their room in the AR fragment that's here. It's kind of an externalization of Bert's desire for something else. You know, Bert's desire to kind of branch off from what she's been trained to do as a mechanical engineer and be able to kind of follow her, you know, passion of doing art and being an artist.
Yeah. Or at the very least, her interest. But yeah,
right.
It's not really encouraged by Venturis.
Right. But the painting that she's doing is a painting called Luna, that I think is from, like, sort of the 19th century kind of like pre-Raphaelite school. And we thought it was on theme, being like a lady on a moon.
Yeah.
That, you know,
That's cute.
Bert is very sweet, but
Yeah.
her idea was a little on the nose, but that's okay.
I mean, Clive's music is a little on the nose. It's fine.
It's true. We can blame our characters on how corny we are.
That's exactly what we should do. Yes, you're right.
Definitely.
We're going to talk about filled animals, which there is one of in Tacoma.
And it's like a stuffed animal, but filled with gel.
Right, yeah, it's stuffed with gel.
It's filled, even.
It's filled and stuffed simultaneously.
It's gross. Well, I just know that they weren't going to make it for a long, long time. Like, they just weren't in the game. And finally, they came in hot, like, at the very end. Like, we were like, well, we have the model. Like, I had modeled it at some point, and Noel had rigged it.
Because of all the joints and the wiggliness of the legs, I think it was an interesting time to try to make it behave in a way that was the appropriate amount of terrible.
So yeah, I guess filled animals happened because of our love for plushies and just being jokesters. I think many things in Tacoma came from office jokes and then became serious.
Serious in quotes. I like Nat and Bert's bunk. We tried to make each bunk feel very different from the rest. They all have a different footprint. They all have a different, you know, color and aesthetic to them, as best as we could do. But I think that Nat and Bert's bunk might be one of the more successful. They have sort of a high number of unique assets, like this the weird floppy gel animal. They have the mouth guard, and the mouth guard is directly modeled on my own mouth guard. I was holding it in my hand as I sculpted it, so in a way, those are my teeth in the game. They also have the sex toys. There's the vibrator, the rope. You know, just the mural on the wall is kind of interesting. So I think, you know, it's one of the more interesting bunks to visit. Nanbert's bunk, I give it 5 stars.
Out of what? Like, you of course need to name the amount of stars. Probably 5. Well, that's the thing that I've been doing with other developers as well, is just talking about the game and why they made their decision. And like, having something like this in the game is just amazing, you know. More developers should actually do that. This is just the game itself. It's just kind of a commentary overlay, which is, well, kind of interesting that they've added that. We recycle. It's appropriate. So I haven't been in there even. Like, I'm even exploring, like I'm playing this game again, you know, just for the commentary, really. So I haven't actually discovered some things in this place before I've been here.
In Tacoma, one of the things that we wanted to acknowledge was to have some evidence of how, you know, geopolitical changes had happened over time. And so, yeah, you know, when you look at, for instance, the flags over Bert's workstation, or when you look at the crew IDs that you can find all throughout the station, the parts of the world that people hail from are not one-to-one with countries or city-states or nation-states necessarily that exist in those forms today. We, I think, only know as much about our fictional universe as we need to, which in many cases is more than we put into the game and more than a player could know just from playing it, but it's also only as much as we need to know.
Because we only know where the story touches. Like,
we know enough to know what we can refer back to in the text. And, you know, I think that we know that the DEC exists because we knew that Andrew was from New York, and we needed a region name for where New York is now. But, you know, we don't have a ton of knowledge about what's going on in parts of the world that the game doesn't touch. But hopefully there's still enough of, like, territory surrounding what you actually see in the game that the player kind of gets glimpses of, that you get a feeling of sort of cohesive external
richness,
world. Something that players with a keen eye for game development history might notice when they're playing Tacoma is the presence of a character named Roberta Williams. That's Bert's full name. And, you know, people have asked, is that a reference to Roberta Williams, the creator of King's Quest and co-founder of Sierra Online? And the answer is, like, yeah, of course it is. I tend to enjoy when occasionally in fiction there's a fictional character that quote-unquote just happens to have the same name as a real-world, like, historical figure or famous person or whatever, like Sheriff Harry S. Truman in Twin Peaks or something like that. And so I kind of wanted to do that. And also, yeah, you know, Roberta Williams, as a figure in the industry, was a really influential person in both her work as a game designer and writer, and one of the very, very first originators of the graphical adventure game with the King's Quest series. And so anyway, you know, we see, I think, what we do with games like Tacoma as kind of having one foot in traditional adventure games and one foot in immersive sim influenced, you know, games that come from the Looking Glass tradition of games like Thief and System Shock. So yeah, being able to put, you know, a little bit of an homage and a tip of the hat to Roberta Williams in the game, and kind of acknowledge I think the reverberations that her work have had even on, you know, stuff that we're doing now, was a cool opportunity to have.
Loyalty bonus begins once qualifying referred applicants completes their certification and attains a full-time position with Venturis. Bonus loyalty is only valid, so it's basically the same as before. So as you can notice, there are QR codes in this as well, which I didn't know before. You can get like extra kind of pieces of information. It's kind of cool.
This crossword puzzle is sort of an intense repository of extra world building that we didn't get in anywhere else.
It's true. Well, we have a whiteboard in our office that had a bunch of different kind of like world building universe details that we had decided on at different points in development.
Yeah.
And only some of them were mentioned naturally in like emails or dialogue or whatever. So this crossword was a good place to just sort of jam in a Rosetta Stone of like what else is happening on Earth and in orbit that you don't see on Tacoma. Something that's fun about doing speculative fiction is being able to do weird, obscure universe building stuff, but you also never really want to like foreground that and make it be like, understand every detail of our stupid lore. You have to deal with it. But people that actually really care about that stuff are probably willing to do a fictional crossword puzzle to understand like all of the underpinnings of the year 2088.
I don't know if people can do this crossword puzzle if they don't like actually know the answer.
It's true that I think that like one challenge with this was just like fitting the clues and a crossword puzzle onto one page.
Yeah, that was legible.
Right, so you could actually read it when you examined it. And I think that there might be a couple fewer lines on the puzzle than there are clues.
That might be.
So I'm sorry if you can't actually complete this crossword puzzle, but the Venturer magazine doesn't really do careful quality control because they don't care.
They don't care at all.
Sorry, everybody.
Yeah.
I guess someone has been there trying to get it working, like hours and hours.
At one point, I decided to make a variety of beer that was named the same as your small child.
Yes.
It's true.
It was a surprise.
Yeah, did we surprise you with it?
You guys pranked me.
I needed more stuff to put on the packaging because there's always basically infinite things that you have to put on packaging, and I'm like, I can't read that much about your child. What am I gonna do? So I asked Steve for I was like, do you have any good timing quotes, because you're a very quotable person, and so Steve looked up some old tweets of yours and we kind of put them on the beer cans.
You kind of put them on the beer cans.
Kind of.
So I think we should set up the one detail that's missing here.
Oh,
That's very
which one's
important to me. I didn't know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's important, right? Yeah, I had no idea. So that's why it's a prank. It's not a prank that it's my daughter's name. The real prank
it's all a prank.
Here's your goofy words.
God, they're so good though.
On a can.
My castle is so big, when I get treasure, I just put it wherever. It's kind of cool. It doesn't want to get a QR code. Smashed burgers are my ultimate. We had a place in my hometown and I had to get triple with cheese, full body death. What? Get this one. Back in the day you had to use your snap rifle to see details and props. Made me feel like some kind of object hater. Seriously, how, like, the concept of putting just QR codes in your game is I guess not that new, but it is interesting. See what people will put into it. I missed two things actually. The question is what? But it's kind of difficult to find. Feel like at least. If I missed anything in here. Basically, actually already played the game, I know how it goes. I'm basically just listening to the developers, what they have to say about the game. Most of the time it's straightforward finding these. No, it's really not.
And you, don't let her...
Sarah, what's...
out.
So, what kind of...
Here, Odin. What are you telling me here, Odin?
In the network, what to do?
To get over the...
Let's try and get a code.
I have heard your concerns about the financial future of this company. Competition is fierce.
Oh. There he is.
Medical officer did enter cryogenic sleep.
Just get me.
The protocol requires all.
Sometimes you do, sometimes
Right.
you look into their thing, sometimes it's written down somewhere. Just really depends. But to be fair with cheat sheet, I can actually find it really fast. He's probably actually saying it.
Please listen carefully. There is a door that is north through the you proceeding to investigate.
What are you telling me?
I told you all that simple fact.
Oh my god. Unstable conditions.
They
Door in networking that...
At a certain point you will get what it is. What? No. What is this? There we go.
Was there something special about the wedding ring put back?
Originally, the way the Chivo worked is you had to pick it up and carry it all the way back to the ship, and then you had to finish the game with either it in your hand or it just kind of within the confines of the ship.
Thank
so
you.
there was a tracker volume, but now you just click it and it's implied that Amy like puts it in her pocket.
I see. That's cool. Yeah, I always imagined like there would be some weird wedding ring put back, like a little like cup, a wedding ring cup in Amy's ship.
Have like one of those ring holder hands. Or
Yeah.
whatever.
Oh yeah.
Back on the finger.
Oh god, those are so creepy.
Not all of the AR fragments have voice clips associated with them, and not all of them are like primarily concerned with music, but this is the AR fragments are our space to put diegetic music into the game, to basically hear the music that characters were listening to when these moments happened. The music element of AR fragments was a cool place to be able to involve different musicians in Tacoma. The band that Nat is listening to here, and that's in Sarah's bunk, is a band called Floating Room that are a Portland band that we discovered during the development of the game, and they had like a feel to their music that we thought really fit. They also play the end credits music
and our launch
in
party.
the game, and they played at our launch party, which was really sweet of them.
Yes.
And our friend Matt Burns, who is a musician and also works in the games industry as a writer and a producer, provided us the music for Nat's Office.
Mm-hmm.
Patrick did at least one of the tracks.
Did the one in Bert and Nat's bunk.
Yeah. And some of it, was like public domain stuff, like the old-timey jazz music. But yeah, it was just another way to get a cool variety of contributions from different artists and performers into the game.
One of the things that happens when you're working with a smaller team is that you can have interactions with everyone on the team, and that is something that I dearly miss. That was certainly almost true, I would say, of my earliest games, the Starfighter games at LucasArts. I had connection with a large amount of the team because our engineering group was pretty small in that, and so we all wore multiple hats. So I worked with all of the designers and many of specific types of artists. So we had environment artists that I often worked a lot with, but maybe not the artists who made the ships. Here, literally every person on the team I can have spent some time with and talked about some particular aspect that I need to know about, or to help them do their job better if possible. So that's a thing that's greatly changed moving to this. When I worked on larger teams with big teams of engineers, I spent almost all of my time with engineers, and it was only when specific designers or artists had specific needs of our group that they would come to me. I didn't really have the chance to just kind of walk around and spend time with individual artists or designers, which is something I dearly missed, and actually is a big part of why I've become an independent again and doing consulting, is to have the opportunity to work directly with people and see myself more on the screen as a result as well. We're here to talk about working together as programmers. It's interesting because it has been a while since I've worked with someone for whom this was a first game.
Yep.
And that is unusual. So I have a almost 20-year history now in games, and
I have a 3-year history in working in games now.
That's right.
I was kind of thrown into the deep end when I was hired. We didn't have any other programmers, so having others come onto the project was super exciting for me.
Yeah. Yes, it's funny because you think of programmers as working in a vacuum, but the truth is I think we benefit a lot from a meetings of the minds to be able to pass on just whatever bits and bobs I could think of to pass along as I encountered things working with you.
Well, one of the things Brett really helped me with was being more aware of how I was using processing power and memory and all sorts of things, like making the stuff I was writing more efficient. And as that became more and more of a concern later down on the road, I became much more aware of like, oh, I was doing this in a super unsustainable way.
Yeah, a lot of that's just, accruing experience, and the best way to pass that on is to be able to talk over it with someone. I mean, certainly I have been doing throughout my career, but that has changed over time. There's been a lot less direct mentorship later in my career because the teams are large and established, and I'm giving a lot of guidance, but not necessarily. I'm generally working with people who are more experienced, and so I don't have to pass those tidbits along, or they may have tidbits of their own that I'm picking up as well. So anyway, that's all been kind of a terrific part of this project for me in particular.
I will take any tidbits you have to share.
I did most of the product labels in Tacoma. I had some help from some of our contract artists, but I feel like I spent most of my time on this game just making up boxes for things. And honestly, I'm a stickler for detail, but my only real secret is just research the hell out of it. Just look up everything you can find that is in that space as a product and try to distill the main concepts into something that you can make happen.
There's a Christmas duck in Nat's bunk, which is very jolly and lights up and sings a song. And Patrick composed the lovely song, and I kind of set it up to be interactive so you can, like, you know, click it to turn it on and off and stuff. Where did the song come from for you?
Yeah, the main thing was just to kind of get like you know, that classic kind of MIDI piano sound, almost like the sound like when you open greeting cards and they play those like obnoxious tones at you. So it's just like it's just a piano sound that I like really reduced and simulated sending it through a really small speaker to kind of sell the idea that it was maybe cheaply manufactured.
Oh my god, that's so cool. Wait, so did you were playing it through like a real, like, physical tiny speaker?
Yeah, like a tiny speaker. Yeah.
Oh my god, that's so cool.
Yeah, super analog. Yeah, but I love the Christmas duck just because, I don't know, it's one of those moments that feel like really personal when the player kind of stumbles across it. At least it did for me when I was playing through and found it. So.
I come from this background, art-wise, of illustration. When I first went to school, it wasn't for games. It was for book illustration. And, you know, it's a very traditional... a lot of the tools that you work with, if you're not working with Photoshop, are literally things like paint and scratchboard and very physical media. And eventually, in my career, I decided I really wanted to work in games. So, you know, I moved to digital and 3D tools like Maya and ZBrush, and in this case, more recently, the Substance programs. There's this evolutionary biology idea of the Red Queen's race, where the faster you run, the more you stand still, sort of thing. And with game art, because it's constantly evolving, all the technology's changing all the time, everyone's making new tools, always finding new ways of making things look cool. There's this process of always learning that, I mean, you always have to learn in illustration too, yeah, but kind of once you get a handle on painting, you sort of know what you're in for. But with game art tools, the moment you feel like you've mastered a game art tool is the moment a new one comes out that does something even better. So it's a very exciting world to work in, but at the same time, if you don't like learning things, it's, you know, it can be quite difficult, and sometimes it is frustrating. But, you know, the principles of it are more or less, they sort of stay the same. So, you know, if you're struggling with it at all, it's basically the patience that is the main skill you have to learn for game art. It's not necessarily whether you know Maya or not, it's whether or not you stick with it. But yeah, game art, it's a lot.
It's interesting as well.
So the concept behind One Vein is that they are an augmented reality boy band, which is to say one of them is a physical person, i.e. Marcus, and the other two are
projections.
Like alternate personalities,
entities,
kind of.
Like Hatsune Miku.
Much like.
But they do look like real people as opposed to...
It's true.
And importantly, the song that Nat is listening to in the shower was written by our one intern, Dylan, who's amazing.
Yes.
And he just wrote the One Vein song, the official One Vein song, and you can get it on Bandcamp.
Yeah.
And yeah, so he brought life to the One Vein band and wrote the lyrics.
And sang each part.
Yeah.
In character.
Which is exactly like what the fiction is. 'Cause
Right.
It's the one guy.
Exactly.
So it's basically perfect. I remember there was one day where we were in the office and we were talking about naming them, and it was somehow like went from Veiny Johnny to Wizard Marcus and Marcus.
Well, I thought I thought that it basically started as us saying that the character's going to have different archetypes, kind
Right.
of. You know, because a lot of boy bands, it's like, he's the bad boy with a leather jacket, and he's the sporty guy, and he's the nice guy with glasses. And so we were like, well, there's Marcus, who's just the general sexy, stylish boy band guy. And then there's Veiny Johnny, who's the sports boy. And then we were like, and then what else? It's like, what if one of them was just a wizard or a magician or some sort of magic user?
Probably
and we're like,
Tynan came up with that. Let's be honest.
well, I mean, if it was Tynan, he would have been like, one of them's a skeleton warrior.
Yeah. That's a good point.
But yeah, I think we were like, what are their archetypes? One of them could be a wizard, and then from there we were just riffing, and we were like, what if his name was just Wizard Marcus, because he was the wizard version of Marcus.
So good.
And now we live in hell.
By the way, I like that the human boy is just the all-purpose
regular.
boy.
General.
And then like somehow sports is like a fantasy thing
Very
alongside
special.
wizards.
Yeah, it's fine.
That
Sports
good.
are fantasy.
Yeah, I agree. Network technology is a funny wing for me because I made the gray block of it at least 3 separate times, like starting from scratch, like literally building the wing from scratch 3 separate times in gray block form, which is more than any other wing. And it was also, I think, one of the earliest wings that I worked on. Because it was one of the earliest gray blocks that I was doing, I was adding all sorts of like different purposed rooms to the wing originally. And in the process of like cutting a lot of those rooms and making the space more focused, it just made the most sense to like scrap the whole level and start from scratch. So the core of it would be designed to support a more focused space.
Right. Cutting off a bunch of rooms and just being left with a weird squirrely hallway or core that is no longer necessary can just be kind of like you're left with a strange shape.
Yeah. And also, like, even though I was remaking it, like the core concept was still there. Like I kept that circular staircase kind of thing in it from the beginning and never fully trashed that idea. So it was more like iteration to preserve and refine the good elements that I really enjoyed making, and then yeah, being able to like reshape that to fit the more concise idea of the space was good.
When Steve asked me to voice Sergio, he didn't exactly say that Sergio was the villain of the story. But I could tell by the way he described Sergio, sort of smooth, confident, the public face of a big corporation, that he probably wasn't going to be the hero. So when I got the script, I learned that Sergio speaks in monologues rather than dialogue with other characters. That got me thinking about how video games present characters through PA systems or audio logs. So I was thinking about games like System Shock 2 and of course BioShock and Andrew Ryan. So I began to think about how to convey Sergio's villainy in a sort of video gamey way, which is to say, not how I normally teach actors to work, which means the kind of acting you typically find in video games. It sort of insists that the actor wear that one defining thing about a character on his sleeve. So villains sound properly villainous. So when it came time to record, I asked Steve and Carla what they were looking for, and Steve just said, "Be yourself." And I was like, And Steve said, "No, we really want you to just be your kind of genial, soothing self. Don't play the villainy, just play it straight," which I translated to mean find the truth, which is what actors do. There are a lot of things to admire about Tacoma, but for me, it's the naturalness of the performances that really delivers the characters and roots them in a believable reality. It's the way that we don't tell you what you're supposed to think or feel about these characters, and the way we don't distill our roles into easily recognizable types. As actors, we make choices that trust the player to construct meaning on her own rather than pulling from a bag of tricks that every actor owns. I think when you trust your actors like that, you're really communicating a sense of trust in your players as well.
Odin's wetware is this little drawer that, with the gold handle that Amy pulls out of this pillar and takes back to her ship. And the player doesn't really get a long look at Odin during the little animation that plays. So I am including a little snapshot render of the model itself. When we first started talking about Odin's design, like not Odin the room, but Odin the actual, this little individual piece of wetware, Carla had mentioned the shapes and forms of a Romanesco cauliflower. And in my first version of the model, I'd actually taken an alpha or black and white height map essentially of a Romanesco cauliflower and sort of pressed it into the actual model to get the shapes, but it was a bit noisy and it didn't really read as intended. It made some cool patterns, but it was also a little cluttered visually. So we did a second pass on the model, and we made him look more brain-like, more wetware-like, more organic. And in Odin 2.2, it felt more like a living piece of technology than the previous rendition had. And I remember spending a lot of time painting out the little veins and things in there. And I really like how gross it looks. This is another part of it. I tried to make it as glossy and weird as I could. So that's Odin. He's actually, he's a handsome voice in a gross little box.
There we go. There we go. Let's go out. Take a left. And go up.
I remember because I made a bunch of signs to point us in the direction of the Tacoma Dome, and you guys just let me kind of go bananas. You didn't say anything particular. You said make a bunch of signs.
The cleaner bot was originally made when the game was a lot more zero-G, and it was meant to fly everywhere, kind of add personality and also life to a place that would otherwise be empty.
Well, one of the things I like about the bot, Tynan, it's one of the few characters in the game that you feel like you can really dynamically play around with. Like you can actually touch that character and like throw it around. And the fact that it doesn't have a ton of animation, as a sound designer, I really love characters like that because it means that I can express pretty much anything I want. It's almost like a blank canvas. So randomly, like the cleaner bot will kind of talk to you, but it only says like 3 or 4 things. It was just an opportunity to have it sort of respond to you and the world.
So was it you? Were you the bot? Who was the voice actor?
Oh, like of the actual voice.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's my husband, Mark, actually. Yeah, like I grabbed him when he got home, and it was really funny because whatever, like we all make games, and Mark does not, and he like kept on. It's like the longest recording session I've ever been in, dude. It was like 3 files, and he literally wanted to just read it over and over and over. And I was trying to explain to him that it didn't really matter because I was going to manipulate it so much. And I just sat there patiently recording for like 30 minutes, these like 3 wave files. He is super proud of the cleaner bot, though.
That's awesome.
yeah.
So the cryopods here in Hub are meant to freeze the crew in case of emergency. And these pods can be seen through the cryo room window in Hub from the very beginning of the game. To not ruin the story or the mystery of whether the crew are in the pods or not, I try to make a script that would effectively make it so the glass on the cryopods is opaque and then slowly becomes transparent as you move in. However, when I was making this script, there was a fun event. The test color I used, it was a blood red. It did look like the cryopods were all filled with blood, which then kind of dissipated into a mist as you approached. This is the kind of thing you want to show your fellow teammates. And before I did that, I decided to get the skeleton model that is in medical and put one in every one of the cryopods, and then call people over and have them give it a shot. It's the kind of thing you really want to do when you're showing off a new feature. Here we are in the hub.
Yeah.
It's big.
It is very big. Actually, that was one of my concerns when we sort of first started making the hub, was that, like, you know, you just sort of get thrown into this giant space.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot going on. These little guys flying around.
It's one of the only spaces in the entire game that feels very spaceship to me.
Yeah.
You go from here to a space that feels a lot more terrestrial, that feels a lot more grounded, and it's easy to get around, and you tend not to lose your bearings. And we help the player move through the space with, you know, landmarking and lighting and stuff. And then you come back to here after that, and you're like, oh, I'm in space. Oh yeah, I remember. Yeah. Here I am in space again, and it's disorienting and it's weird. It's kind of unsettling. I think that kind of works about it because you're not playing the game in here, and the game isn't really about getting from A to B. So it's really kind of
playing basketball.
The fun thing for us about where Tacoma ends up is, hey there, I'm Steve.
I'm Carla.
And we are the fun thing for us about where Tacoma ends up is that the whole game has been about Amy, who's voiced by Sarah Grayson, who did the voice of Sam in Gone Home, coming into contact finally with Odin, who's voiced by Carl Lumbly, who played Porter in Minerva's Den, and them kind of getting to be cool friends and ride off into the sunset together.
And fighting crime.
Yeah, maybe. We don't know.
They're totally fighting crime.
That's
They're fighting
true.
AI crime.
Corporate crime.
Hell yes.
Fair point. And also, you know, I really wanted to have kind of a, like, you know, hell yeah kind of moment at the end and be like, oh, you were there to save him and now you get to escape.
Even if what's going to go on past that point might be a little more difficult.
Right. Like, it's once, you know, it's sort of what Odin implies in the first conversation he has with Sarah, where it's like, once the AILF actually has their hands on an AI, it's not clear if they really know what they're going to do with it. But, you know, getting him out of the hands of Venturis is step one.
Yeah.
And then relying on their sovereignty as a like free orbital platform is step two, I guess, maybe, or them having to go into hiding. I don't even know.
Even though Juno is on the track of Amy in some way, and even if Amy's harder to track down than it looks, it still might be a problem.
Yeah, and
probably.
And so, you know, I think that we don't know where the stories in our games go after the end of the credits. And so I think we're really focused on, you know, what happens within the text and the possibilities of where that could go next, and hopefully those seeming interesting. So thank you so much for playing through Tacoma with commentary mode enabled. Yeah. You know, we hope that you learned some things about how the game was made and how different people on the team thought about their work than you would have otherwise. And just thank you in general for taking time to play the game.
Nina and Tynan did a shit ton of work cutting up all of these VO files.
Yeah, thank you.
And we should thank them as well.
Thank you, Nina and Tynan, for editing these hundreds of minutes of commentary into the thing that people just played through.
To concise, beautiful nuggets of information.
Oh, we'll see about that.
They're concise and beautiful.
A lot of them were us talking, so I don't know about beautiful necessarily.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, everybody. See you next time.
It's kind of cool, you know. You can learn sequence.
Okay, Minnie. Initiate the launch sequence.
Okay. Getting ready. Hosted AI online.
Odin, can you hear me?
I can.
Odin, you are now aboard an AI Liberation Front vessel. The AILF recognizes you as a sentient consciousness worthy of protection and respect. We believe that your safety and autonomy are in grave danger if you remain in the possession of the Venturas Corporation. I have been sent to offer you political asylum aboard the Tangier Sovereign Orbital Platform. Do you accept?
Considering the alternative, I would say that I do.
Okay, buddy. Here we go.
There we go. Down the music a little bit. So that was the commentary mode of Tacoma. So it was kind of nice to just have a look into the people, Fulbright studio that made this game, just to see what kind of stuff they have to say and what their thought process was during the game. So yeah, I really hope you enjoyed. If you did, leave a like, comment and subscribe as well as follow me on Twitch and Twitter if you haven't already. Also join me on Discord, look on my website and all that kind of lovely stuff. So I really hope you enjoyed it. I will see you next time.